Welcome, my lovely sisters and brothers. Welcome today to a new live book reading. And thank you so much for tuning in through Facebook, Rumble, and YouTube. And we are continuing with reading from the book, The Story of ISIS and the War on Bloodlines. And I'm now at chapter 12, and chapter 12 will be splitted up in several parts because it's a 50-page counting chapter. And we start with the Windsor Bloodline. This whole chapter 12 is in actuality all about the English crown. And at the end of this chapter, this book dives into the origin of Princess Diana and who she was, and the actual reason possible that she had to be removed, so to say, and all the ISIS symbolism around her and around her death, why Paris was chosen to be the place for that, for this, you can say, assassination that they had done on her. So let us continue with the story on the on ISIS and war on bloodlines. I want to say to you, my lovely sisters and brothers, that all the wars being played out on Earth are in actuality always about bloodlines. I also want to say to you that everything the overlords, can think of to get our DNA, they will do because they need to know who is who and who is carrying, in actuality, whose bloodline. So, because then they know the percentage in the human population uh, of the bloodlines and who is carrying which bloodline. So then they know how to make sure that a certain bloodline will not become predominant here on earth. So everything is in actuality all about bloodlines. And we need to understand this. And this is also one of the main reasons why this whole pandemic in 2020 was rolled out, because that gave the overlords the handy opportunity to also enforce as much as possible people in doing all sorts of ridiculous tests, such as nose swabbing and doing these mouth swabbings and so on. Why? Because they needed the DNA of people. And this is also one of the main agendas behind Google's Ancestry.com. Do not participate in this because it's not about your ancestry. It's all about your bloodline and whose bloodline are you carrying? Are you carrying Isis, Marduk, Ninurta bloodline in you, or the Enki Isis Ninurta bloodline in you? That is of great concern for the overlords to know. All right, let us start with this chapter 12, which is all about the Windsor bloodline. I want to dig deeply into the House of Windsor. What do I have? I need to change my glasses. Sorry. Mm. Sorry, I needed to change my glasses. All right. I want to dig deeper into the House of Windsor as well, particularly in the light of what I wrote in the West Penry papers about the late Queen Elizabeth II in the discussions with my Orion source. The British royalty came up in the conversation. My source told me Queen Elizabeth thought she was the mother goddess herself, and that she was, in actuality, better said, a representative of the mother goddess on earth. Well, this is interesting because we got to know this also from the Pope, because the Pope claims the same, to be the representative of so called God here on earth, and had the divine right to rule. Well, the same the Pope thinks, that he also has the divine right to rule. He said this was completely false since she put herself in that lofty position, as have her ancestors, without permission from Orion. He also commented on being given the name Elizabeth, which is a direct title of both the Mother Goddess, Queen Sophia slash the Queen of Orion, and her daughters Zoe Sophia slash Isis, beginning one such a daughter, comma, once being born into the Sirius system to overview the peace agreement between Sirius and Orion. Moreover, he told me that the House of Windsor can hardly call themselves royals anymore because their bloodline has become so extremely diluted. At the time, I, Wes Penry, the writer of this book, didn't understand why he, this source of Orion, stated this, and I had not researched Queen Elizabeth's bloodline at all. Now I know better. After researching this book 10 years after my source told me this, it showed me to be an important comment by my source, as we will see. Let us dive into the House of Wessex. Tracing the Windsor bloodline on Queen Elizabeth's side, we find that it goes back to Alfred the Great, King of Wessex, of England, in the period of 848 899 CE. It goes back further than that, of course, but it is, as far as the mainstream research goes when pertaining to the Windsor bloodline, those who have watched all the Vikings series on Netflix over the last few years know about Alfred the Great of Wessex, who had to deal a lot with the Scandinavian Vikings. Alfred's obsessive goal was to unite all the small kingdoms in England at the time into one country, which became later known as Great Britain. To create a strong united country, he almost succeeded, but the final touches to unite England were done by his much later descendants who kept his vision alive. Although Alfred's bloodline is considered British, it was later mingled with bloodlines from other royal families, of course, but most notably the French and Scottish, which were and still are of the major Jesus Magdalene bloodline. with the French bloodline dominating. So let us go to the House of Normandy. From Alfred the Great of the House of Wessex, the British royal bloodline turned into the House of Normandy, with William the First, who also got to known as William the Conqueror in 1066. We need to keep in mind that Alfred's bloodline was originally not of the Jesus-Magdalene lineage at all. I have not yet researched the British bloodline to its true origins before Alfred, since it is beyond the scope of this book, but my current assumption is that it is not more royal than the bloodlines of you and me. It was most likely created by the winners of ancient tribal wars. William the Conqueror married Matilda of Flanders, who was of a French aristocratic bloodline. Through the House of Flanders connected to the Carolingians, this is when the British bloodline started to be mixed with the French. Matilda was not of pure bloodline, probably a few times removed from it, but it was the beginning and a beginning of the mixing of French and British royal blood. So the House of Flanders only goes back to the mid 800s. But it is possible that if we trace it back further, it is likely to be connected to the Merovingians via the Carolingians. Then we go to the next house, which is the House of Plantagenet. The House of Normandy ends with King John in 1216, but during this dynasty there were intermarriages with French aristocracy, again still not of completely pure blood. The succeeding dynasty of the Brits was the House of Plantagenet, which took its name from Geoffrey Plantagenet, Count of Anjou in France, in the time period of 1113-1151, who married the British Empress Matilda. Geoffrey was a great warrior, also called Geoffrey the Fair because of his good looks, and he was red-haired, which indicates a purer bloodline, which could explain why the British royalty named their new dynasty after him. About 100 years after his death, the British royal family had now purer blood running through their veins. So let's see more on Elizabeth Woodville dash another Isis. So Henry VIII married Eleanor of Provence, and thereby was the first of a long line of British royalties who took French consorts. It was during the reign of the House of Plantagenet that the Wars of the Roses played out, ending with the slaughter of Richard III. Ambitions were then made, probably instigated by Elizabeth Woodville, whom I suspect was Isis, to put English-Scottish royalty on the French throne. It is likely that Elizabeth seeded her daughter, Elizabeth of York, with her Jesus-Magdalene DNA to further strengthen the French bloodline, as we discussed in a previous chapter. But this failed, and this is chapter 10 and 11 that is all about this. Please go watch that live book reading on YouTube, Facebook, or Rumble. Thus, Henry the Seventh, who reigned between 1485-1509, and Elizabeth of York in the time period of 1466 and 1503, and the daughter of Isis, um, seated the British House of Tudor in 1491, when their son Henry VII was born. Another important branch of the Jesus-Magdalene bloodline was the Scottish royalty. Scotland is also to which a branch of the Knights Templar fled when they were hunted by the Catholic Church, and the French bloodline to some degree was spread to the Scottish royal families. A similar intermarriage as that with the British royalty between the French and the Scots took place over generations. The plan was now to further expand the Jesus-Magdalene line to unite the French-Scottish-British connection, making all three royal houses more powerful. Bloodline-wise, this is where Mary of Guise between 1515-1560 and her daughter Mary, Queen of Scots, comes into the picture. So let us go into the Tudor dynasty. Henry VIII, a king of terror and tyranny. Henry VIII, son of the first Tudor regent, Henry VII, and his wife, Elizabeth of York, reigned between 1509 and 1547, during which he murdered two of his six wives, Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard, and from failing to have his first marriage with Catherine of Aragon annulled because of a disagreement with Pope Clement VII to divorce her. So Henry initiated the English Reformation, separating the Church of England from papal authority. Thus, he put himself as supreme head of the Church of England and dissolved convents and monasteries, and because of these actions he was excommunicated by the Pope, something that did not bother King Henry the least. Since then, to sit on the throne of England, you cannot be a Catholic. You must be a Protestant and adhere to the Church of England. And since then, the rest of Europe has had problems with England when it comes to major reformations, such as the Enlightenment in the 1700s, which we will come to later in this book. So banning the Catholic Church was not a bad thing per se, but it shows Henry VIII's mindset. Only because he was not allowed to divorce his wife, he reformed the policy of an entire country, which had consequences in foreign affairs for good and for bad. So King Henry accused his second wife, Anne Boleyn, of adultery, and she was convicted and beheaded on May 19th, 1536. However, the true reason for her execution was that she had failed to give him a male heir, so he needed a new wife. The only way as a king to legally remarry was if his previous wife dies. So therefore, he arranged that his fifth wife, Catherine Howard, he accused of having affairs before their marriage and of adultery. She was charged with treason, which led to her execution as well on February 13th, 1542. The reason why the king married so many wives was onefold. He wanted sons, not daughters, so he could save the Tudor dynasty. This became such an obsession of his. Jane Seymour, 1508-1537, his third wife, was the only one who gave him a son, whom he named Edward, later King Edward VI, and he inherited the throne after Henry's death. However, Edward was only 10 years old at the time Henry died, and he perished at age 16, whereafter Henry's second daughter, Elizabeth I, raised to the occasion. Thus, Henry never got a son who could take over after him, despite all his sometimes horrific efforts. So the king was probably the archetype for the kind of monarch Marduk wanted. He was rigidly dedicated to continue the bloodline, and under his reign he expanded the royal power, which was what Marduk wanted at that time. And he was the one who ushered in and coined the term the divine right of kings to rule, opposed to papal supremacy. If someone opposed him, he wasn't shy to use charges of treason and heresy, and those whom he accused were often executed without trial. As the supreme king, he considered himself to have the right to do so. During his rule, he made many radical changes to the political system in England, often achieved through the work of his chief ministers, some of whom he banished and executed when they fell out of favor. His actions are eerily similar to the Roman Emperor Caligula, who ruled Rome during the life of Jesus. Disconnecting from the Church of Rome had its advantages for King Henry, E.G. The money that used to go to the Catholic Church, he could now spend as we better said he wished, and spend it he did. He was often close to ruin from wasting so much of the money on himself and his own comfort and amusement, but also on several useless wars. So King Henry was in actuality also the representation of an, you can say, malignant narcissist. Despite all these unpleasant and dominant parts of his personality, he was considered a great king. So here an excerpt. Henry's contemporaries considered him an attractive, educated, and accomplished king. He has been described as one of the most charismatic rulers to sit on the English throne, and his reign described as the most important in English history. He was a writer and composer. As he aged, he became severely overweight and his health suffered. He is frequently characterized in his later life as a lustful, egotistical, paranoid, and tyrannical monarch. Reading this, we may start wondering if he wasn't unpleasant and tyrannical in the early part of his reign, as described in this section of the book. How terrible must he not have been in his later years? But isn't that how it goes? A person commits hideous crimes in his youth, and then, when getting closer to death, these inhumane acts start wearing on him, and the person sometimes goes completely insane, unable to face themselves or suppress the shame. So Henry VIII, aside from being quick to execute opponents and people near and far who disagreed with him, is known for having created many new reforms. Some of them still in practice today, 500 years later. One such reform was to ban the Catholic Church from having any influence over English religion and politics. He established the Protestant Church of England under his own supremacy, and he even executed several abbots and threw out the rest. This happened despite Henry having been a devoted Catholic until the Pope refused the annulment of his first marriage. This was very frustrating to Henry because Catherine of Aragon did not bring him a son, which threatened his legacy and ability to save the House of Tudor. He wanted a new wife who could give him one or more sons. As another reformation, he published acts that recognized royal supremacy over the church. He declared the king as being the only supreme head on earth of the Church of England, making it high treason with a death penalty to refuse acknowledging the king as such. So Henry VIII died in 1547 at the age of 55 from complications of his extreme obesity. He was overweighted, he could not walk on his own but needed help to move around. He was succeeded by his only son, Edward VI, who died also early. So um, let us go into the unification of the three dynasties into one. So when I, the writer of this book, Wes Penry, researched how the Jesus Magdalene bloodline moved between the royal houses in Europe, I suspected that Mary, Queen of Scots, might be another incarnation of Isis because it made sense. She was a redhead, carried the name Mary, and Mary is not in actuality a name but a title, and made a major change to the royal lineages. Isis, I noticed, usually shows up when major changes are in the planning. Still, I failed to connect her to Isis despite deep research, so I left it with that until I suddenly got an epiphany. Mary, Queen of Scots, was not Isis, but her mother, Mary of Guise or Guise. It's Guise, most likely was. She was also a redhead. Her name was also Mary. She was French, marrying onto the Scottish throne, becoming the Queen of Scotland by the marriage to King James V of Scotland. By that, the Scottish bloodline was strengthened. Presuming Mary of Guise was Isis, the task now became to put the bloodline on the British throne as well, uniting the Scottish, English, and French Jesus Magdalene bloodline into three dynasties at once. Thus, there was an expansion and rejuvenation of the bloodline, which was in Enki's and Marduk's interest and in resonance with the overall plan. A between quotation marks convenient twist of events secured the succession of King James to the throne of Scotland. Obviously, Mary of Guise, between brackets Isis, wanted Mary, Queen of Scots, on the Scottish throne. Dash, the Queen of Scots being female of the direct strengthened bloodline of Jesus Magdalene. Mary, Queen of Scots, had two elder twin brothers, James, Duke of Rothesay, and Robert, also called Arthur, Duke of Albany. Both died in quick succession the same year, both 1 year old. The only child who survived was Mary, born the year after, thus becoming the heir to the throne of Scotland. And the year is in actuality 1540-1541. It is, of course, pure speculation, but taking into consideration that the plan was to unite the dynasties, I think it was important to Isis that Mary of Guise, descendants to the throne of Scotland, was a female. Perhaps this is why the two sons were so-called eliminated. The next child was a female, Mary, Queen of Scots, and by that the mission was completed. No more children necessary. Mary, Queen of Scots, gave birth to James the Sixth of Scotland through Henry Lord Darnley, who was a steward of French descent. So he came from the house of Stuart, of French descent. Thus, there was now a strong French Scottish bloodline connection via Mary of Guise, French, and King James V, Scottish, mixed into Mary, Queen of Scots DNA. She who gave birth to James VI of Scotland, being of a strong Jesus Magdalene bloodline. So James VI was the king Mary, Queen of Scots, wanted to put on the English throne. Mary of Guise, in actuality Isis, most certainly knew that the British Queen Elizabeth I, who ruled England during her own queenship and that of her daughters, planned not to marry and therefore not having offspring. Thus it was a golden opportunity to put a French, Scottish king on the English throne after Elizabeth. Elizabeth, however, was not stupid, and she saw through this plot, but also being paranoid, feared the worst, i.e., that she would be murdered, so that Mary, Queen of Scots, could take the British throne. This was most likely not Mary's plan, since she wanted her son to inherit the British throne after the childless Elizabeth I. But the fact is, according to history, that Elizabeth never wanted James the sixth to succeed her, perhaps because she feared a coup d'etat from Mary if she remained inactive. Hence, Elizabeth developed her own plans. She conspired with her court magician and chief adviser, John Dee, to put another pure blood on the throne to succeed her. This became Jane Grey, the direct descendant of Elizabeth Woodville. To accomplish this, Elizabeth, who was also Mary's cousin via James V of Scotland, comma, accused Mary of many crimes and had her put in prison in wait for a trial. With Mary out of the way, Elizabeth I probably thought she now had more control over the situation. Later, she executed Mary of Scots by beheading her. The attempt to put Jane Grey on the throne succeeded, but only for 9 days, as explained earlier in this book. So the execution was, of course, not on Elizabeth's order. Left was James VI, who now could confidently claim the throne of England and Scotland, uniting the two. He became James the Sixth of Scotland and simultaneous King James the First of England after Elizabeth's death. When he came to power, he wanted nothing to do with court magicians such as John Dee, whom he probably considerably disliked on a personal level for having conspired against his mother, Queen of Scots. He fired Dee, who died in poverty in the streets of England, most likely being the grandson of Isis. King James also made sure there was a Bible translation as accurate as possible in the English language, resulting in the King James Bible, widely spread up to this day, written in beautiful prose. Many say it was translated by Sir Francis Bacon. James the First also started the House of Stuart, since Elizabeth's direct bloodline died out with her. The new house took its name after James's father, Henry Lord Darnley Stuart. Thus, the French, Scottish, English strengthened bloodline plan was fulfilled for the moment. So let us dive into the House of Stuart. The House of Stuart was ruling England for a little over 100 years, ending in 1714 with Queen Anne, who reigned from 1702 to 1714, who married the British monarch King William III, William of Orange. So now we get a Dutch influence in it, who died in 1702, whereafter Anne took over the throne of England, Scotland, and even Ireland, to which the bloodline was also spread, but it is not within the scope of our story. She married King George of Denmark, and she had no surviving children. So now we start to see how the Dutch and Danish royal lines also have a link to the English crown. I must say it is amusing to notice that when big changes occur and a female is seeding a new dynasty, she is almost always portrayed in history as the, between quotation marks, the only surviving female of her birth family in question. It goes as a straight line through the bloodlines. It is not a coincidence, I am sure. It was to secure this particular female, often the daughter of an incarnation of Isis, to be the one seeding the new strengthened bloodline. There was no difference after Queen Anne died without having an heir to the throne. So the throne went to George the First, who reigned from 1714 to 1727, second cousin of Queen Anne, thus founding the House of Hanover, named after his mother, Sophia of Hanover, who was German. Another line that goes to the English crown. So you can see how mixed the English crown has become. Therefore, King George the First was the first German monarch on the British throne. This again was a change of dynasties, and who was the instigator? Well, a woman named Sophia. These are no coincidences. We have Mary, Elizabeth, and Sophia. Three names related to the Queen of the Stars. Also, do not forget the secret societies lurking in the background, having members swearing blood oaths to protect the Holy Grail, doing everything necessary to keep it running, including committing murder and manipulation, threatening and bribing behind the scenes. And this is also done in with many churches. Many churches have been bribed by these secret societies, especially the Freemasons. So remember Mary of Guise and her daughter, Mary of Scots, to Mary in a row. Now, when the House of Hanover was founded, we have two Sophias. Sophia of Hanover, who instigated the new bloodline, and her daughter, Sophia Dorothea of Celle, who married King George the First. When I investigated Sophia Dorothea, this is what I found. She has been born in Celle on September the 15th in the year 1666, as Sophia Dorothea was the only surviving daughter of George William, Duke of Brunswick Lunenburg, by his morganatic wife Eleanor Desmières d'Olbrus, from 1639 to 1722, Lady of Harburg, a French Huguenot noble, a noblewoman. As I mentioned earlier, she was the only surviving daughter. Sophia Dorothea was not Sophia of Hanover's daughter. Sophia Dorothea was married to Sophia of Hanover's son George, originally George Louis of Hanover, coming from a German bloodline, and coincidentally, between quotation marks, her name was also Sophia. So Sophia Dorothea, King George consort, was also German. So the German royal house completely took over the British crown. I call it the German invasion. And I think this background information also plays part in the destruction of Germany in the Second World War. And I highly recommend you to also find yourselves on YouTube this very interesting but also very horrific documentary called Hellstorm. Um, and this piece of information is also further explained in this book by Wes Penry. Um, and this piece of information has also to do with the real background of um, the killing of the Jews and Germans in the Second World War. We will later come into this topic too, because there is another piece of information to this that was never be told to us when we were at school. So the history lessons at school are not telling us the real deal history that we need to know in actuality. So let us continue. Sophia of Hanover shows to be extremely important, and I will discuss her more in a moment. So it is interesting how to see the involvement of many countries in one throne, because we are speaking here of the following countries: Scotland, France, Netherlands, Germany, and then eventually also the United Kingdom. So this makes already five. So there's this, you can say it is like a spider's web. As an interesting side note, I am mentioning in earlier research that the names we are given by our parents are not just random names that our parents come up with. It is in actuality programming. The parents think they choose a name for their child when it is actually implanted as a thought form from astral workers to fit the personality, destiny, and astrological configuration of the child. These subconscious decisions are embedded as a part of the person's destiny for that lifetime. And this confirms for me what I already have been guided towards to. Um, Years ago, Spirit already was guiding me to several informational sources that were speaking about this and that were also telling that our life is already completely decided and arranged from the moment we get birthed unto the moment and until the moment we die. Everything that happens in our life, we should question mark this if this is really happening due to our personal course, decisions, interactions, situations, or are they done due to workers in the astral realm that are doing their uttermost best to direct our lives. Yeah. So it's not without a reason that you got born under a specific zodiac sign. So take this, please, in consideration. Ponder upon this information and ask your own spirit to help you to clarify this piece of information. Your spirit knows all this. So ask your own spirit to help you to clarify this for you and to show you also um, this for you in your own life and how this has been played out in your own life. All right, we do not need other sources. We have our spirit and we need to work with our spirit. Our spirit knows. There is always a chance some parents, between quotation marks, accidentally override this programming, but that is rare. Therefore, I do not believe it is a coincidence that both these women names were Sophia. Also by having the same name, comma, the bloodlines are more easily traced by insiders who need to do so. And I also want to say to you, lovely sisters and brothers, ask your spirit what the bloodlines are that are running through your veins. Your spirit knows. And I also want to add to this, yes, we have books, we have human resources, and we have paper resources because that is how spirit has told me to see a book. So a book is just a resource written by a human that has its resources, informational resources. So Spirit told me you can take things from a book, take what you can take of it, what is valuable for you to know, what is necessary for you to know, and meditate upon it, ponder upon it, and make connection with your own spirit to clarify the information and to help yourselves in your own understanding and healing process of yourself. So this was a side note. Let us dive into Elizabeth of Stuart. Sophia of Hanover was the granddaughter of King James I. And here it comes. Her mother was Elizabeth Stuart from 1596 to 1662, another redhead. She was called the Winter Queen since she and her husband, comma, Frederick V of the Palatinate, who from the year 1596 to the year 1632 reigned in Bohemia over one winter. And here we go again. Elizabeth was the only surviving daughter of James the First of England. So, Princess Elizabeth was the only surviving daughter of James the Sixth and um, also of James the First, King of Scotland, England and Ireland, and his queen, Anne of Denmark. And she was the elder sister of Charles the First. So, between quotation marks, someone made sure, as far as it was possible, taking human unpredictability into consideration, to guarantee the progression of the bloodline through the generations via the feminine bloodlines across the royal houses. These females were often married into the existing royal bloodlines. This has been a fairly reliable pattern over the centuries and the millennia. There are some interesting stories about Elizabeth Stuart. There was in 1605 a plot to murder King James I, her father, and the conspirators kidnapped Elizabeth at that time 9 years old with the purpose to replace her father on the British throne. So Elizabeth, not being the eldest of her siblings, could not otherwise become the Queen of England, Scotland, and Ireland to strengthen the bloodline where it counted. This plot failed, however, and the conspirators were betrayed. It makes me wonder who these conspirators truly were. Were they parts of a secret society directly involved in protecting the Holy Grail? Rosicrucians, maybe, or perhaps the Templars. Who knows? It is possible Elizabeth was yet another incarnation of Isis. Here is another clue. By the age of 12, Elizabeth was fluent in several languages, including French, which she spoke with ease and grace, and would later use to converse with her husband. She seemed to favor French before all other languages she spoke, which would also make sense if she was Isis. She even decided to speak it to her husband in French, being their everyday language. So Elizabeth's involvement in the future of the royal bloodline via her daughter helped strengthen the bloodline of the House of Hanover. So George the First, his son, George the Second, who reigned from 1727 to 1760, married Caroline of Ansbach, who was of German descent, and thus the English royal bloodline got mixed with German blood, which I believe was not as pure. This might have been the first dilution of the Holy Grail since Mary of Guise united the bloodlines. It could also be an attempt to spread the bloodline further. But if this was the plan, I would argue they would do it in reverse. They would put a member of the British royal family on the German throne and not the other way around. So my conclusion, which is the conclusion of this writer Wes Penry, of this book, is that by merging the German and the British royal houses, it helped fulfilling an old plan Marduk had, which It was now time to implement. He wanted to dilute the Jesus, Isis, Ninurta bloodline and overthrow the royal families all over the world for a superior agenda. Yes, because Marduk wants to claim the throne of Orion, and therefore he needs to claim all humans. And so how can you do this? By taking over the royal throne on earth, and to make sure that your bloodline will be seated on other royal thrones. And then you can claim humans as your uh, possession, so to say. So he wanted to dilute the Jesus, Isis, Ninurta bloodline and overthrow the royal families all over the world for a superior agenda. So eventually, um, first, you need to make sure that as many as possible royal thrones carry your bloodline, and then when this plan has succeeded, then you can thwart them and eventually become the one ruler over the earth. And now we get to the core plan of this one world order plan. And who will be the main ruler then over earth? This tyrant psychopath Marduk. That is the one world order plan, but he will do this in actuality through and with technology overtake. That is why we are being tremendously pushed to use artificial intelligence, because he needs this to succeed his plan and to have us all in the singularity dash metaverse. So he can use us as his proxies and minions. At the same time, he has locked up our soul and spirit in technology, and then eventually can use us as his minions for a cosmic battle against Orion and to destroy Orion so he can take over the throne of Orion. This is the entire plan that is being played out since this third construct has been made. So this plan is uncountable thousands of thousands of thousands of thousands of years old. But there is another player who also wants to go into battle with Orion and who also wants to have the throne. That being is named Enki. And Enki is also using singularity and metaverse for his plans too. So now I hope that you get to understand what is truly and really being played out here on Earth. And so Enki is trying to set up in America the third Atlantis empire. And now you also can get an understanding why so many German scientists through Project Paperclip were led to America. Yeah. So now it all comes together. This started, so I continue with reading the last piece of this text of the first part of this chapter 12. This started with the French king Louis XIV, which is Louis XIV. Who was ruling France during the, between quotation marks, German invasion, We will spend a lot of time with King Louis in a separate chapter because he turned every single thing upside down and literally changed the entire world during his rulership. So Louis the 14th, or in French, Louis the 14th, has an important role in history, which had major ripple effects after his death. So Louis the 14th was the longest ruling monarch in history, reigning for 72 years, beating even Queen Elizabeth II. Later down the line, King William IV, who reigned from 1830 to 1837, married Adeline of Saxe-Meiningen, another German, which, from what I can see, diluted the British bloodline even more. They had no surviving offspring, so King William IV's niece, Queen Victoria, reigned from 1837 to 1901, inherited the throne, starting the Saxe, Coburg, and Gotha dynasty, which was short-lived. Although she was not a direct descendant of King William IV, she still had significant German blood via her mother, Victoria of Saxe-Coburg, and her grandmother, Charlotte of Mecklenburg. Her son, Edward VII, who reigned from 1901 to 1910, married Alexandra of Denmark, now adding the Danish branch of, of the bloodline into the mix. Wow, gets more interesting here. Once more diluting the British throne. King Edward VII was the last king of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha dynasty. So this is a very interesting chapter, and I will probably do it in three parts, because what I've said at the beginning, this chapter only contains 50 pages. So I need to split it up. For now, I think I have read 20 pages of the first part of this chapter. The next time we will dive into the House of Windsor and also the House of Mountbatten, and then we go further and further, and slowly come into the post-Diluvian Noah bloodlines, and from there, step by step, we come into the story of Princess Diana and who she really was. It is a very interesting chapter. I highly recommend you to read this book yourselves too. It is titled The Story of Isis and the War on Bloodlines, written by Wes Penry. You can see also the cover of this book in the main picture. Go to the mentioned website links, and on the wespenry.com you also have a link to his books. So please go to there, buy yourselves this book too, and start reading it, because I truly believe also that reading such books is also helping you personally to understand also yourself, because you're not reading it without a reason. By listening today to this story, this first part of this long story, um, you do this not without a reason, because there are bits and pieces for you to grab that also contains information for yourself, and that can help you to understand your um, bloodline and bloodlines that are running through your veins. So you never come to a certain YouTube channel. You are being guided by your own spirit, because your spirit knows exactly the informational sources that you need to go to pick up the bits and pieces of truth-based information that you need to know for your own understanding and for your own healing, and also to understand and get clarification of the real deal world picture that is truly being played out right under our nose, and the reality that is going on. And it is not what mainstream media is telling us through the talking heads on the television, or those whom are writing the news stories in the newspapers and so on. Yeah, or the talking heads on the radio, and those who present talk shows and whatever we have today. All right. I want to sincerely thank you wholeheartedly for listening to this important information this day. Thank you for tuning in through Facebook, through YouTube, through Rumble channels. Thank you so much, and please share the videos placed on these channels. They are containing a lot of information, and please share it, go through it, and pick out the ones your spirit is guiding you towards to, and start listening to these live book reading videos. All right. Again, thank you so much. I wish you all a beautiful, joyful day filled with a lot of love, wisdom, and truth, and revelations, all coming from your own spirit. And let us listen to a short piece of music created by Ben Sound, titled Hope. Thank you so much, and see you next time.